This is page 42 in our notes. I'm going to be using blue and green today for my colors. This is standard EE 1, 2, and 3. This will be used on all parts of the test. So with it being on all 3 parts, it is very important. Today we're talking about write and evaluate, algebraic expressions. Writing them is one thing. Evaluate is just a fancy word for solving them. And then algebraic expressions. What makes them algebraic? Algebraic means they have variables in them. Variables are when we're going to start using numbers here in math, where we get the term algebra. So the first thing I want to talk about is a numerical expression. A numerical expression is just with numbers. So the term expression would just be like if you're adding numbers, multiplying them, dividing them, subtracting them. So it's just a math phrase with numbers only. So I'm going to write that down. A math phrase with, and I'm going to call it numbers only. So there's no letters or anything. Examples of numerical expressions, I'll give you a couple examples of those. Those examples would be like 3 plus 5. So it's an expression. It doesn't have to have an equal sign or anything like that. You don't have to solve. 12 minus 8 would be an example. Just math. 27 divided by 9. 2 times 4. So those are just expressions. Variables is the next term we like to talk about. Variables. And variables is just a fancy word for using letters in math. And when you use the letters in math, you always use them as lowercase letters. So when we use variables, it's a letter that could be substituted in like for one of these numbers. So instead of saying 12 minus 8, you could say 12 minus x. And you could just put a letter there that could be substituted to represent a number. So variables are a letter that could represent a number. Variables are always lowercase, so I want to make sure we know that they are always lowercase. A lot of times when you see them typed, they look like they're almost like slanted or italicized. Most common letters that you would see are X, Y, A, and Z. Those are common variables that you would see in math. So numerical expressions are numbers. Variables would be like using letters in math. So then we get into algebraic expressions. Algebraic expressions are very similar to the numeric expressions, but now we're using a variable. So algebraic expression, let me box in the term here, would be a math phrase with one or more variables. So a math phrase with one or more variables. So examples that would make them algebraic. The moment you see a letter, they are algebraic expressions. So you could say like x plus 7. That would be an example. Y minus 7 would be another example. 12 next to an m, that means 12 times m. You will always see it with the number first and the variable second. You will never see it m12. It will be 12m right next to each other. That means multiply. A divided by 3. Those are all algebraic expressions. The next part in our notes, we're going to make a little table. And the table, I want to leave a little space here for the red line. You're going to have math terms. And then you're going to have the expression. And then you're going to be asked to write that. So we're going to kind of trace this blue line here, making our table. I'm going to give you some more room to write the expression. And then something like this going down. So I want to give you 2 lines or 2 spaces to do the first one, 2 spaces to do the next one. 2 spaces here. I need to add just a little bit more onto my chart. So the reason why we need that is the first thing I'm going to do is plus over here, then we'll do minus, then we'll do multiply, and then we'll do divide. So algebraic expressions, math terms that you may see when we're adding, you might see the word sum, which means to add. You might see keywords that say more than. You might see a word like total. Those all mean to add. An expression you might see would be something like the sum of x and 7. So what does that mean? Sum means to add. So if we were going to write it, it would look like x plus 7, or you could say 7 plus x. In this case, the way this is read to us, you would write it this way first, even though they're the same thing. That's the way I would prefer to write it because that's the way it reads for the expression. When we're talking about subtracting, your math terms would be like difference, less than, the word decreased. These are all words that would be wanting you to subtract. This one's kind of tricky. It says 7 less than y. And when you write this, if you have 7 less than y, like if y were 10, what would 7 less than 10 be? It would be 3. So in order to write it, you actually write it backwards. You would say y minus 7. And this is the only way you can write it. And that's the reason why I want to put a star here is this almost sounds backwards. People want to write 7 minus y. If I wanted 7 minus y, then I would say minus here, but it's 7 less than y. So you have to start with y and then subtract 7. So I want to put a star here. This sounds like it is backwards. So when you write it, this is the only way you can write it. You can't flip it. Y minus 7 is not the same thing as 7 minus y. With subtraction, you can't flip. You can't flip this around. That is the only way you could write that. With multiplication, the key words would be like product, times, of. Those are all words that mean to multiply. So if I gave you an expression that says the product of 12 and m, that means you need to multiply 12 and m. Ways you could write that: 12 next to an m means 12 times m, 12 dot m, like 12 times m, 12 in parentheses m, because that means to multiply next to it. You could say 12 times m, but this is probably the least preferred because now it looks like 12xm, and you don't know if this is multiply or if this is supposed to be a variable. The most common way you're going to see multiplication is a number right next to a variable. Division, you're going to see words like quotient, divided by, and when you see that, the expression might say the amount A divided by 3. And as you read it, A divided by 3, that's how you're going to write it. A divided by 3. Probably the most common way you're going to see it is like that. A divided by 3, probably not very common, but that means the same thing. A over 3, A slash 3, they all mean the same thing, but probably the most common way you're going to see it is that one right there. The next thing you're going to see in your notes is you're going to see some things that say evaluate. And whenever you see evaluate, it is just a fancy word for solve. So evaluate is a fancy word to solve something. So that means to solve the expression. And you may have to solve the expression by replacing a letter with a number that they give you. So you may have to by replacing, and instead of calling it letter, we're going to call it replacing the variable with a number, and make sure make sure you use PEMDAS, or what we call orders of operations, when you are solving it in the right order. Make sure you solve the order of operations in the correct order. And what do I mean by this? Well, let me give you an example. An example you're going to see on your homework looks like if x were to equal 12, and then they give you this semicolon, then can you evaluate, which is a fancy word for solve, can you evaluate x plus 9? So a lot of kids are like, I just don't know what to do here. Well, if x equals 12, and you put x equals 12, and you put that in right here for x. So instead of saying x plus 9, you say, okay, so this would be 12 plus 9, then you would get 21. That is your answer. You just solve by replacing the variable with the number. The next example that I have is 2 parentheses 4e, and then there's a semicolon, and it says e equals 5. So what you need to do is you need to use e equals 5, and you have to put that in right here for where you see e. So if I rewrite this, it's 4 parentheses, meaning 2 times 4 times e, but instead of e, you're going to put a 5 in there. So 2 next to parentheses means time, 4 next to a letter means times, and then you just multiply all these. 4 times 5 gives me 20, and next to parentheses, 2 times 20 equals 40. So you need to multiply because it's next to parentheses and next to each other. Put a star here. If a number and variable are next to each other, what does it mean? It means to multiply. So examples, when you see 12m, if you see 3r, those are examples to multiply. Another star, the number always goes before the variable. Okay, you will always see 3r, you will not see r3. So I'm going to put a little line through it. You won't see it like that. Your homework for this particular assignment is a worksheet, page 88 and 90, and you will do all on both sides, and you may use a calculator for help, but you need to show your work. And I believe this is, you have to skip a page in the packet to find this paper because it's 2 pages back from the last one that we did. So it'll say page 88 and 90 on it, and it's talking about writing expressions, and they'll give you some clues, and you have to write the expressions like we just did in the chart. You'll have to solve by filling in numbers for those variables. That's page 88, and when you turn it over, page 89 is very similar. There are 8 problems on it, and you'll have to solve and figure out what the value is when you plug in 75 for r in this particular equation and solve. So that will be your homework.